The Abyssal Trench was a wound in the world, a miles-deep scar filled with the bones of things that had crawled too far down and never crawled back up. Kael knew every rib, every shattered femur, every hollowed-out skull that lined the path to the scavenger's drop. He'd memorized them the way other men memorized the faces of loved ones. Tonight, they were his only audience. His stomach made a sound like a dying engine. It had been 3 days since his last real meal, a handful of grubworms he'd dug from a corpse's eye socket, and even those had been half-rotten. His hands shook as he dragged himself over a mound of calcified bone, his knees scraping against the rough edges of a broken pelvis. The air was thick with the smell of decay and ozone, the faint electric tang of the trench's ever-present storm clouds. Rain pattered against the skeletal canopy above, dripping down in cold, needle-thin streams that found the gaps in his patched leather coat. He'd been tracking the lizard beast for hours. It was a small thing, no bigger than a dog, with scales the color of rust and a single, milky eye that had gone blind in its old age. It had been easy prey, too easy, and Kael had almost felt guilty when he'd snapped its neck. Almost. The guilt had vanished the moment he'd smelled the blood. Now, crouched in the hollow of a giant ribcage, he held the creature's heart in his trembling hands. It was still warm, still pulsing with the last dregs of life. His mouth watered. He didn't care that it was raw. He didn't care that it might give him a mutation, a third eye, a useless tail, a skin condition that would make him a laughingstock in the lower warrens. He just needed to eat. He bit down. The heart burst between his teeth, hot and metallic, the blood flooding his tongue like liquid rust. He chewed frantically, swallowing chunks whole, his throat working in desperate, convulsive gulps. It was the most delicious thing he'd ever tasted, and the most disgusting. He caught a piece of gristle and gagged, but forced it down. He couldn't afford to waste a single calorie. It was then that the blade spoke. "You eat like a corpse with a death wish," said a voice in his head, smooth and dry as old parchment, laced with a kind of horrified amusement. "I've seen more dignity in a starving rat." Kael choked, heart-stopping. He scrambled backward, dropping the half-eaten organ, his hand instinctively going to the rusted knife at his belt. His eyes darted around the bone hollow, searching for the source of the voice. Nothing. Just the rain, the bones, and the distant howl of something large and hungry. "Who's there?" he rasped, his voice cracked from disuse and fear. "Down here, you oaf," the voice said, and Kael's gaze dropped to the object half buried in the dirt beside him, a shattered black blade, its surface pitted and scarred, its edge jagged as a broken smile. It was the kind of thing he'd normally have pawned for scrap, but now, as he watched, a faint purple light pulsed along its fractured length, like a heartbeat. You're a sword," Kael said, his voice flat with disbelief. "You're a talking sword." "And you're a talking idiot," the blade replied. "But at least you're a talking idiot with excellent taste in desperation. That heart you just devoured. It was laced with fear. Pure, unadulterated terror. I could taste it from here." A pause, then a soft, almost sensual hum. "You have no idea what you've just done." Kael stared at the blade, his mind reeling. He'd heard stories of sentient weapons, ancient relics from the before time, but they were myths, fairy tales told to frighten children. And yet, here it was, speaking to him with the condescending tone of a bored aristocrat. What are you?" he managed. "I am Morrigan," the blade said, the name rolling off its voice like silk. "And you, little scavenger, are a walking feast. You eat monsters to survive, don't you? You consume their flesh, their blood, their fear. And I can taste it. Every last drop." The purple light pulsed again, stronger this time. "I've been dormant for centuries, waiting for someone with your appetite. You see, I have a system. A way to filter all that chaos you swallow into something clean. Something perfect. You eat, I extract the essence. You get upgrades, real upgrades, not the crippling lottery you're used to. And I get a taste of the divine." Kael's hand tightened on his knife. "Why should I trust you?" "Because you're starving," Morrigan said simply. "And I'm offering you a way out. Not just survival, but power. The kind of power that lets you walk through the trench without looking over your shoulder. The kind that makes other scavengers bow down and pray you don't notice them." A pause. "Or you can keep eating hearts raw and hope you don't grow a second head. Your choice." Kael's stomach growled again, a violent, painful spasm. He looked at the half-eaten heart on the ground, then at the blade. The rain continued to fall, drumming a steady rhythm on the bones above. He thought about the lower warrens, where he slept in a hole he'd dug himself, surrounded by the starving and the desperate. He thought about his mother, who had died of a mutation that turned her bones to glass. He thought about the fact that he had nothing left to lose. "Fine," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do I have to do?" "Just keep doing what you're doing," Morrigan said, and Kael could have sworn she was smiling. "Eat. Kill. Consume. And let me handle the rest." The purple light flared, and Kael felt a strange warmth spread through his chest, like the first sip of hot broth after a long cold night. "But I should warn you, Kael. I'm not easy to please. I have a palate for the exquisite. And you." Her voice dropped to a purr. "You taste like desperation. I like it." Kael swallowed hard, his throat dry. He looked at the blade, then at the heart. Slowly, he reached out, his fingers brushing the cold, shattered metal. A jolt of energy shot up his arm, and for a moment, he saw something, a flash of a vast, dark feast, a table stretching into infinity, set with dishes that glowed with an otherworldly light. And at the head of the table, a figure made of shadows and hunger, watching him with eyes like twin stars. Then it was gone, and he was just Kael, a starving scavenger in a world of bones, holding a talking sword that promised him a way out. He picked up the heart and took another bite. The rat beast's squill died in its throat as Morrigan's edge bit through fur and bone. Kael felt the vibration travel up his arm, a shudder of pleasure, not resistance. The blade drank. A thin, crimson thread of light coiled along the jagged fractures in the black metal, pulsing like a vein before sinking into the hilt and vanishing. "Oh, that's a nice one," Morrigan purred, her voice sliding through his skull like warm oil. "Fear-flavored. Tangy, with a hint of desperation. You're learning." Kael ignored her. His ribs ached, and the world swam in the grey half-light of the trench's upper levels. The rat beast, a bloated, bristle-furred thing with too many teeth, lay twitching at his feet, its blood pooling in the cracked stone. He'd killed it with a single, clumsy swing, using the sword more like a club than a blade. But it was dead. That was what mattered. He crouched, grabbing the creature by its tail. The flesh was warm, greasy. His stomach clenched with a hunger so fierce it bordered on pain. He didn't wait. He tore into the meat with his teeth, ripping strips from the haunch, swallowing without chewing. The blood coated his tongue, metallic and thick, and for a moment, he was nothing but a starving animal. Morrigan's laughter echoed in his mind. "Chew, Kael. You'll choke, and then I'll have to find another scavenger to drag me around. And they'll probably look worse than you." He grunted, forcing himself to slow down. The meat was stringy, but it was food. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, feeling the warmth spread through his chest. The rat beast's essence, whatever that meant, settled in his gut like a coal, glowing faintly. "All right," he muttered, "what now?" "Now," Morrigan said, her tone shifting to something hungry, "we see what you've become." A jolt ran through him, sharp and electric. His ears popped, and the world snapped into focus. The distant drip of water became a roar. The scuttle of insects in the walls became a symphony. He could hear the scrape of claws on stone 100 paces away, the labored breathing of something large and patient. Kael staggered, clutching his head. "What the?" "Enhanced hearing," Morrigan said, matter of fact. The rat beast's fear was sharp, focused. It gave you a clean upgrade. No random mutation. No twisted limb. Just the ears of a predator. He blinked, testing the sensation. He could hear the wind moving through the cracks above, the skitter of a centipede crawling over a distant rock. And underneath it all, a low, rhythmic thrum, a heartbeat. Big. Slow. Hungry. Kael's blood went cold. "Something's coming," he whispered. "Yes," Morrigan said, her voice dripping with anticipation. "And it's coming fast." The predator hit the ground with a wet thud, its shadow swallowing the dim light. It was a hound beast, twice the size of a man, its skin a patchwork of chitinous plates and weeping sores. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow, and its maw dripped with saliva that sizzled where it touched the stone. Kael didn't think. He ran. His boots slapped against the slick rock as he sprinted down the narrow tunnel, Morrigan clutched to his chest. The hound beast roared, and the sound was a physical force, rattling his teeth. He could hear its claws scraping the walls, its breath hot on his heels. "Don't run," Morrigan hissed. "Fight. I'm not dying for your meal ticket," he shouted back. He rounded a corner, skidding on loose gravel, and found himself in a dead end. The wall loomed before him, slick with moisture. He spun around, raising Morrigan in a trembling grip. The hound beast skidded to a halt, its massive body blocking the only exit. It lowered its head, a growl rumbling from its chest. Kael's enhanced hearing caught every nuance, the grinding of teeth, the flex of muscle, the rapid thrum of its heart. "It's scared," Morrigan said, almost reverently. "Not of you. Of something else. But it's scared." Kael's mind raced. He could hear it now, a tremor beneath the beast's growl, a hitch in its breath. It wasn't hunting him. It was fleeing. From what? The answer came with a sound like tearing cloth. A shadow detached itself from the ceiling above, moving with impossible speed. It struck the hound beast's flank, and the creature let out a shriek that cut off mid-note. Kael watched, frozen, as the shadow, a serpentine shape, black as oil, with eyes like twin embers, coiled around the hound beast's body. There was a crunch, a wet gurgle, and then the hound beast collapsed, its ribs caved in. The shadow mamba raised its head, tasting the air with a forked tongue. Its gaze swept the dead end, and for a heartbeat, it locked onto Kael. He didn't breathe. The mamba's head tilted. Then, with a flick of its tail, it slithered away into the darkness, dragging the hound beast's corpse behind it. Kael sagged against the wall, his legs giving out. His heart hammered against his ribs, and his new ears picked up the fading sound of the mamba's scales scraping stone. That, Morrigan said, her voice low and thrilled, was a shadow mamba. Fear flavor, exquisite. The kind that screams. Kael stared at the empty tunnel. It almost killed us. It would have. If you'd been slower. She paused. But you weren't. Because of me. He looked down at the blade in his hands. The black metal seemed darker now, the fractures like veins of shadow. He could feel its hunger, a gnawing emptiness that mirrored his own. You want it, he said. That mamba. More than you know, Morrigan purred. Its fear would be intoxicating. A flavor that lingers. A taste that changes you. Kael swallowed. The rat beast's meat had given him hearing. What would a shadow mamba give him? Speed? Strength? Something more. But it's a predator, he said. Top of the food chain. I'm just a scavenger. You were a scavenger, Morrigan corrected. Now you're something else. You're my partner. And partners don't run. He laughed, a hollow sound. You're insane. Perhaps. But I'm also the only thing standing between you and a slow death in this pit. Her voice softened, almost seductive. Let me feed, Kael. Let me taste its fear. And I'll make you into something that doesn't have to run. Kael looked at the tunnel where the mamba had vanished. The darkness was absolute, but his new ears could hear the faint rustle of its movement, the heartbeat of a creature that had never known fear. Until now. He pushed himself to his feet, his grip tightening on Morrigan's hilt. Fine, he said. But if I die, I'm haunting you. Morrigan's laughter was a dark, delighted sound. Oh, I'm counting on it. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was a purr, low and hungry. More. I need a richer flavor, something that screams. The trench stank of rot and copper. Kael crouched behind a fallen pillar, his new ears twitching at every drip of moisture and scuttle of distant claws. His stomach, a hollow pit that had known nothing but scraps for weeks, screamed for anything. Anything at all. In his grip, Morrigan hummed, a low, vibrating thrum that traveled up his arm and into his teeth. The black blade, still cracked and chipped, seemed to drink the dim light around it. There, she whispered, her voice like silk drawn over a razor. A slug. Fat, juicy, and absolutely reeking of fear. That little tremor in its trail. It knows we're here. It's terrified. Kael followed her point, a glistening, foot-long slug oozing across the mud, its pale flesh pulsing with each sluggish undulation. Its skin shimmered with a sickly green sheen, and every few seconds it spat a glob of acid that hissed against the stone. Kael's nose wrinkled. That? It looks like a pile of phlegm with a death wish. It's food, Morrigan said flatly. And more importantly, it's fear-flavored. I can taste its panic from here. It'll give you something, maybe acid resistance, maybe a new way to spit. Who knows? That's the fun of it. I'm not eating that. You're not eating that. Her voice rose in incredulous mockery. You, the man who licked a rat's entrails off this very blade not 2 hours ago, are turning up your nose at a perfectly nutritious slug. That rat was desperate, Kael muttered. And this isn't. Kael stared at the slug. It had stopped moving, sensing something. Its eye stalk swiveled toward him, and it let out a wet, gurgling hiss. The sound made his skin crawl. It's unappetizing, he said finally. Morrigan's laugh was a sharp, brittle thing. Unappetizing. Oh, that's rich. You're a scavenger in the Abyssal Trench, living on scraps and near-death experiences, and you're picky? You have standards. Everyone has standards, Kael said, though his stomach chose that moment to growl so loudly it echoed off the nearby walls. The slug tensed. It began to ooze away, faster than before. It's getting away, Morrigan observed. Let it. You're making a mistake. I'll make my own mistakes, Kael said, standing. He wiped his hands on his tattered trousers. There's got to be something better around here. Something that doesn't look like it'll dissolve my insides. Everything in the trench will dissolve your insides, Morrigan said dryly. That's the point. But fine. You want something with a bit more panache. I can work with that. Kael felt a pulse of something through the blade, a sensation like a tongue licking the air. Morrigan was tasting the world through him, her senses extending beyond his own. Ah, she said, her tone shifting to one of hungry delight. There. About 200 yards east. A spiked boar. Big, mean, and absolutely drenched in fear. It's been fighting something, a rival, maybe, and it's wounded. The fear is rolling off it in waves. It's perfect. A boar. Kael's mouth watered despite himself. Boar meat was rare. It was thick, fatty, and didn't taste like a sewer. Is it dangerous? It's a monster with spikes on its back and a temper to match. What do you think? Kael grinned despite himself. I think I'm tired of being hungry. That's the spirit, Morrigan purred. They moved through the trench with practiced silence. Kael's new ears were a gift, every scrape of claw, every whisper of wind, every faint heartbeat reached him with startling clarity. He could hear the boar before he saw it, a heavy, rhythmic breathing, punctuated by grunts of pain. He found it in a small clearing, surrounded by the remnants of a collapsed structure. The boar was massive, easily the size of a small cart, with a hide like cracked leather and a ridge of bony spikes running from its skull to its tail. One of those spikes was broken, and a deep gash along its flank oozed dark blood. It was rooting through the rubble, snorting, its small eyes wild with pain and rage. It's wounded, Kael whispered. Perfect, Morrigan said. Fear and pain. That's a cocktail I can get behind. Now, how do you want to do this? Kael studied the beast. Its spikes were formidable, but its injuries made it sluggish. He could see the way it favored its left side, the way its breath hitched with each step. I'll go for the throat, he said. It's distracted. If I can get close enough. You'll get gored, Morrigan interrupted. Those spikes aren't just for show. And a wounded boar is the most dangerous kind, it's got nothing to lose. So what do you suggest? Use your ears, she said. You can hear its heartbeat. You can hear the blood pumping through its veins. You can hear the exact moment it's about to charge. Use that. Kael closed his eyes. He focused. The boar's heartbeat was a steady thump-thump, faster than a human's, but with a slight arrhythmia, a sign of exhaustion. He could hear its breathing, the wet rasp of air through its snout. He could hear the scrape of its hooves on the stone as it shifted its weight. Okay, he said. I've got this. He moved. The boar's head snapped up, its beady eyes locking onto him. It let out a guttural roar and charged, spikes lowered, hooves pounding the earth. But Kael was ready. He'd heard the shift in its weight, the tensing of muscles. He dove to the side, rolling out of the path of the charge. The boar skidded, trying to turn, but its wounded leg buckled. It stumbled, and Kael was on it in an instant. Morrigan sang as she cut through the air. The blade bit into the boar's neck, and the beast let out a choked squeal. Blood sprayed, hot and dark, and the boar crashed to the ground. Kael stood over it, panting, his hands shaking. The boar twitched, then went still. Beautiful, Morrigan whispered. Now eat. Kael didn't need to be told twice. He carved into the boar's flank, cutting out a chunk of raw meat. It was warm and fatty, and he shoved it into his mouth, barely chewing before swallowing. The taste was rich, gamey, and utterly satisfying. But then the essence hit. It wasn't like the rat. The rat's essence had been a whisper, a faint tickle. This was a flood. Kael gasped as something crawled through his skin, hardening it, layering it with a strange, chitinous armor. He watched in awe as his arms and chest darkened, a glossy, black plating forming over his flesh, flexible but tough. "Chitin," Morrigan said, her voice thick with satisfaction. "That's a good one. You'll be able to take a hit now." Kael flexed his arm. The chitin shifted with him, like a second skin. He felt stronger. More durable. Alive. That was incredible, he breathed. "That was fear flavor," Morrigan corrected. "The boar's terror, distilled and refined." "You're welcome." Kael laughed, a sound that felt foreign in his own throat. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel like a starving scavenger. He felt like a hunter. He stood, wiping blood from his mouth, and turned to survey the clearing. The boar's carcass lay behind him, a testament to his kill. He felt a surge of pride. That's when he saw the man. He was standing at the edge of the clearing, half hidden in the shadows of the collapsed structure. A scavenger, like Kael, dirty, lean, with the hollow look of someone who hadn't eaten in days. But his eyes were sharp, and they were fixed on Kael's new arm. On the chitin. A slow grin spread across the man's face. He reached down and drew a long, jagged knife from his belt. Well, he said, his voice a rasp. "Look what we have here. A fresh meal, walking around with shiny new armor." Kael's hand tightened on Morrigan. His new ears picked up the man's heartbeat, fast, but steady. "Not afraid. Hungry." "I don't want trouble," Kael said. The man laughed. "Too late for that, friend. You've got something I want." He gestured with the knife. "And I'm willing to take it." Kael felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He'd survived the trench by avoiding fights, by staying in the shadows. But now, with Morrigan in his hand and chitin on his skin, he wasn't sure he could run. Morrigan's voice slithered into his mind, dark and eager. "He's scared, you know. Underneath that grin, he's terrified. I can taste it." Kael swallowed. "I don't want to kill him." "That's fine," Morrigan said sweetly. "But he wants to kill you. So maybe you should let me help." The man took a step forward, knife glinting in the dim light. His grin widened. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," he said. "Just hand over the sword, and maybe I'll let you keep your life." Kael stood his ground. His heart pounded in his chest, but his hand was steady. "No," he said. The man's grin faltered. Then he lunged. The knife came in a silver blur, aimed at Kael's throat. He twisted, the blade scraping across his new chitin plating with a screech that set his teeth on edge. The scavenger, a wiry man with a face like a kicked-in ration tin, cursed and stumbled forward, off balance. Kael's heart hammered. His new armor had just saved his life, but the shock of the attack still rattled through him. He'd been so focused on the boar's carcass, on the strange, satisfying fullness in his belly, that he'd let his guard drop. Stupid. The trench didn't forgive stupidity. The scavenger recovered, spinning around with the knife held low, a street fighter's stance. His eyes flicked to Kael's chitin-armored forearm, then to the black blade in Kael's other hand. A greedy light kindled there. "That's a nice piece," the man said, his voice a dry rasp. "And that arm, that's high-quality mutation. You've been eaten good, scavenger. Real good." Kael said nothing. He could feel Morrigan vibrating in his grip, a low thrum of anticipation that was almost purring. "Let's make this simple," the scavenger continued, taking a cautious step forward. "You give me the sword and a piece of that boar, and I let you walk away. No hard feelings. The trench is big enough for both of us." "The sword's not for sale," Kael said, his voice steadier than he felt. The scavenger's grin widened. "Didn't say sale, friend. Said give." He lunged again, faster this time. Kael raised his armored arm to block, and the knife skittered off the chitin with a jarring thud. Pain shot up Kael's arm, the armor absorbed the blow, but the impact still rattled his bones. He stumbled back, trying to find space to swing Morrigan, but the scavenger pressed in, slashing low, aiming for Kael's unarmored legs. Kael jumped, feeling the blade whistle past his shin. He landed awkwardly, kicking out with his boot, catching the scavenger in the knee. The man grunted, staggered, and Kael seized the moment. He swung Morrigan in a wide arc, not aiming to kill, just to drive the man back. The sword sang through the air, and the scavenger recoiled, the tip of the blade drawing a thin line of red across his cheek. He touched the wound, stared at the blood on his fingers, and his grin turned feral. "Oh, you're gonna pay for that." He came at Kael again, and this time there was no finesse, just raw, desperate violence. Kael blocked with his armored arm, felt the knife bite into the chitin but not pierce it. He shoved forward, using his weight, and the scavenger fell back, tripping over the boar's carcass. Kael didn't hesitate. He drove his knee into the man's chest, pinning him to the ground, and pressed Morrigan's edge against his throat. The scavenger froze, eyes wide, the knife clattering from his hand. "Please," he gasped. "Don't. I was hungry, man. We're all hungry." Kael's breath came in ragged gasps. He could feel the man's pulse hammering under the blade, could smell his fear, sharp and acrid, like burnt metal. And in his hand, Morrigan shuddered with delight. "Oh, that's good," she whispered, her voice like silk over a razor. "That's really good. Fear flavor, Kael. You can taste it, can't you? Rich and dark and desperate. Like aged blood wine." Kael ignored her. He stared down at the scavenger, at the terror in his eyes, and felt something cold settle in his gut. This was what the trench did to people. It made them predators or prey, and sometimes both in the same breath. "Get out of here," Kael said, his voice low. "And don't let me see you again." He lifted the blade, stepped back, and the scavenger scrambled to his feet, grabbing his knife and bolting without a backward glance. Kael watched him disappear into the rust-colored underbrush, then let out a long, shaky breath. "You let him go," Morrigan said, her tone dripping with disdain. "He would have killed you for a scrap of boar meat. And you let him walk." "I'm not a murderer," Kael said, sheathing her at his hip. "Not for nothing. That's a luxury you can't afford," she replied. "But fine. The fear flavor was still exquisite. I'll savor that memory for a while." Kael shook his head, turning back to the boar. He'd have to move fast, the scent of blood would draw more predators, and more scavengers. He carved a few strips of meat, wrapped them in a piece of stained cloth, and slung the pack over his shoulder. His stomach growled, still not satisfied. The boar had filled a corner, but there was a gnawing emptiness that went deeper than hunger. "You're thinking about the shadow mamba," Morrigan said, reading his silence. "You mentioned it," Kael said. "Said its essence would be delicate. Delicate and delicious. Shadow mambas are ambush predators. They strike from darkness, and their victims never see them coming. The fear they generate is pure, untainted by thought. It's a rare vintage, Kael. And the upgrade it offers is, well, you'll see." Kael didn't ask for details. He'd learned that Morrigan's vagueness was part of her game. She liked to dangle the carrot, watch him chase it. They moved through the trench, Kael following Morrigan's subtle tugs, a shift in her weight, a faint warmth along the blade. The terrain grew rougher, the air thick with the smell of rot and damp stone. Shadows pooled in every crevice, and Kael's heart beat a steady rhythm against his ribs. He spotted it before it struck. A flicker of movement in the corner of his eye, a sinuous shape sliding between two boulders. He froze, hand going to Morrigan's hilt. "There," he breathed. "I see it," Morrigan purred. "Careful now. They're fast." Kael crept forward, his boots barely whispering on the cracked earth. The shadow mamba was coiled in a patch of darkness, its scales a shifting, iridescent black that seemed to drink the light. It was longer than Kael was tall, its head raised, tongue flicking out to taste the air. It sensed him. Its head snapped toward him, and Kael saw its eyes, pale, lidless, filled with a cold intelligence. There was no fear in them. Only hunger. The mamba struck, a blur of motion. Kael threw himself aside, feeling the wind of its passage ruffling his hair. He rolled, came up with Morrigan in hand, and the mamba was already coiling for another strike. They danced in the shadows, Kael dodging, slashing, the mamba hissing and striking. Its fangs grazed his shoulder, but the chitin held, and Kael drove the blade deep into its body. The mamba thrashed, wrapped around his arm, squeezing. Kael gritted his teeth, feeling the pressure build, and twisted the blade. The mamba went limp. Kael pulled the sword free, breathing hard, and watched the creature's body twitch and still. "Beautiful," Morrigan whispered. "Now eat." Kael knelt, cut open the mamba's belly, and found the heart. It was still warm, still pulsing faintly. He brought it to his lips and bit down. The taste was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. It was cool and clean, like moonlight on still water, with an undertone of something dark and electric, the fear of a creature that had never known fear until its final moment. Kael swallowed, and the world shifted. His eyes burned. He blinked, and the darkness around him sharpened into impossible clarity. He could see the individual grains of sand on the ground, the faint heat shimmer rising from the mamba's corpse, the tiny insects skittering in the shadows. His vision had become a mosaic of lenses, each one offering a different angle on the world. Multi-lensed eyes, Morrigan said, satisfaction dripping from her voice. You'll see things others can't now. Hidden threats, invisible trails. Useful. Kael blinked, testing his new sight. The world was richer, more detailed, but also disorienting. He focused on a distant boulder, and his vision seemed to zoom, bringing it closer. He could see a crack in its surface, a spider waiting in the crevice. This is incredible. And that's just the beginning, Morrigan said. There's something else. Something deeper in the trench. Kael felt a pull, a subtle tug in his chest, as if a thread were connected to his heart and leading him somewhere. What is it? A flavor, Morrigan said, her voice dropping to a reverent whisper. A god-tier flavor. I've only sensed it once before, centuries ago. It's intoxicating. Kael's stomach growled, loud and insistent. He looked down at himself, at his armored skin, his new eyes, and felt a grin spread across his face. Then let's go find it. Morrigan hummed in approval, and together they turned toward the deep trench, where the shadows grew darker and the air smelled of ancient power. The trench floor was a graveyard of rusted metal and shattered bone, the air thick with the stench of decay and the ever-present hum of distant predators. Kael moved like a ghost, his bare feet silent on the cold stone, his new eyes, multi-lensed, alien, sweeping the darkness ahead. The world was a tapestry of heat signatures and faint glows now, every crack and crevice alive with the shimmer of life. He could see the shadow mamba's trail, a faint, oily smear of heat that coiled between the rubble, leading deeper into the warren. Morrigan's voice slithered into his mind, a purr of anticipation. It's close. I can taste its fear already, a thin, bitter thing, but it will do. Kael tightened his grip on the hilt. The blade was warm, almost feverish, and he felt the faint pulse of her hunger through the metal. You said it would be a challenge. I said it would be a meal, she corrected, a hint of amusement in her tone. There's a difference. Now stop talking and listen. He did. The mamba's heat signature had vanished. One moment it was there, a sinuous coil of warmth ahead, the next, nothing. Kael froze, his breath catching. The silence stretched, broken only by the drip of water somewhere in the dark. His new eyes swept the area, but the shadows were deep, and the mamba was a master of them. Behind you, Morrigan hissed. Kael spun, but too late. The shadow mamba struck from the darkness, a blur of black scales and glistening fangs. He threw himself sideways, but the beast's tail caught him across the chest, sending him crashing into a pile of debris. Pain flared through his ribs as he scrambled to his feet, the mamba coiling back for another strike. Its eyes were pits of darkness, and its body seemed to drink the light, leaving a trail of deeper shadow in its wake. It's fast, Kael gasped, raising the blade. You're faster, Morrigan said, her voice sharp. Use what you've gained. See it. Kael focused, his multi-lensed eyes shifting, each facet adjusting to a different spectrum. The mamba's heat signature flickered back into view, a faint, ghostly outline against the cold stone. It was already moving, lunging toward him with a speed that blurred the air. But now Kael saw the tell, a slight tensing of muscles before the strike, a shimmer of heat where its fangs would land. He sidestepped, the mamba's jaws snapping shut inches from his face. He brought Morrigan down in a savage arc, the blade biting into the beast's flank. The mamba shrieked, a high-pitched wail that echoed through the trench, and thrashed, trying to dislodge him. Kael held on, driving the blade deeper, feeling the hot spray of blood against his skin. The mamba's tail whipped around, wrapping his legs and squeezing. Kael gasped, the air forced from his lungs. He could feel his ribs creaking under the pressure, and his vision began to blur. But Morrigan was a living weapon, and she knew what he needed. Its heart, she said, her voice a whisper of pure hunger. Take its heart. Kael's free hand shot out, claws, newly grown from the chitin armor, sinking into the mamba's side. He tore through scale and muscle, feeling the beast's frantic heartbeat against his palm. With a final, desperate surge, he ripped the heart free. The mamba convulsed, its grip loosening, and Kael fell to the ground, gasping, the heart still pulsing in his hand. For a moment, he just lay there, chest heaving, the taste of blood and adrenaline in his mouth. Then Morrigan's voice came again, softer now, almost reverent. Eat it. He didn't hesitate. The heart was warm and slick, and he bit into it with a savage hunger that surprised even himself. The blood flooded his mouth, rich and coppery, and as he swallowed, he felt a new power surge through him. The world sharpened, the darkness receded, the shadows becoming less absolute, the edges of objects clearer. His eyes, already enhanced, now seemed to pierce the veil of night itself. He could see the individual grains of dust in the air, the faint glimmer of moisture on a stone. Morrigan let out a low, shuddering moan that vibrated through the blade. Oh, that was exquisite, she breathed. The fear in that creature, it was pure, untainted. I can taste its last moment, the panic, the flight, the final, desperate strike. It's intoxicating. Kael wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, still panting. You're welcome. You did well, little scavenger, she said, her tone almost affectionate. But that was just an appetizer. I need something that begs. Kael's blood ran cold. What does that mean? It means, Morrigan said, her voice dropping to a whisper, that there is something far greater down here. Something that has never known fear. And when I taste it, it will be a feast beyond your imagination. Kael looked down at the mamba's corpse, then into the darkness beyond. The new night vision showed him a path, winding deeper into the trench, where the shadows seemed to pulse with a malevolent life. His stomach growled, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that he would follow it. Fine, he said, rising to his feet. But if this thing kills us, I'm haunting you. Morrigan laughed, a sound like the ringing of a cracked bell. Oh, I would never let that happen. You're far too delicious to waste. Kael shook his head, a grim smile tugging at his lips, and began to walk into the dark, the sword's hunger a constant, seductive pull at the edge of his mind. The fire was low, a bed of coals that pulsed like a dying heart. Kael sat with his back to a shattered pillar of what had once been a highway overpass, the rusted rebar jutting from the concrete like the bones of a leviathan. The night air of the Abyssal Trench was thick with the smell of damp rot and distant screeches, but he'd grown used to it. He turned the haunch of a rock rat over the flames, the fat sizzling and popping, and tried not to think about the way his new eyes, the shadow mamba's gift, made the darkness bloom in shades of violet and green. Morrigan lay across his knees, her black blade drinking the firelight without reflecting it. The voice that came from her was a purr, low and smug. You're broiling that thing like it owes you money. The fear in it is thin, but the marrow still sings. You should suck the bones dry. Kael grunted, turning the meat. I'm not sucking bones. I'm eating. You're wasting, she said. Every meal is a chance. The fear flavor of a rock rat is a whisper, but even whispers can teach you to be quieter. To be lighter on your feet. Do you want to be lighter, Kael? I want to not be hungry. Hunger is the first spice. The rest is just presentation. The meat was barely cooked when he tore into it, the juices running down his chin. He chewed, swallowed, and felt the familiar tingle as Morrigan's system sifted through the essence. It was a sensation like a warm needle sliding through his veins, and then, nothing. No new trait. Just a faint sense of balance, of grace. He flexed his fingers, and they felt more nimble. Better, Morrigan said. You're learning to savor the small things. But I want a feast. Kael was about to retort when the sound came. A dragging, stumbling noise from the dark, punctuated by a wet cough. He reached for the hunting knife at his belt, but Morrigan's voice was a sharp whisper. Wait. Don't move. Let it come to us. The shape that emerged from the gloom was a man, or what was left of one. His left arm was missing below the elbow, the stump wrapped in a filthy, blood-soaked rag. His face was a mask of grime and cuts, and he was clutching his side, where a dark stain spread across his tattered tunic. He saw Kael and collapsed to his knees, gasping. Please, he wheezed. Please, I need help. There's a nest, wolf spiders, they got my arm. I can't, he broke off, coughing, and spat a wad of blood onto the cracked asphalt. Kael's first instinct was to step back. In the trench, a wounded stranger was either a burden or a trap. But the man's eyes were wide, desperate, and his breathing was ragged. He looked at Kael's face, then at the sword in his lap, and something flickered in his gaze, recognition, or fear. You're the one, the man whispered. The one who killed the shadow mamba. I heard the scavengers talking. They said you have a blade that sings. Kael's jaw tightened. They talk too much. Please. I have a daughter. She's hiding in a pipe near the old pump station. If I don't come back, she'll starve. I just need a bandage, some food, a few hours to rest. I'll be gone by dawn. The man's voice cracked, and Kael felt a pull in his chest. He'd been that desperate once, not so long ago. He started to rise, but Morrigan's voice cut through his thoughts like a cold blade. Don't. Kael paused. What? Look at his stump. The rag is too clean. The wound is too neat. And his eyes, they're not the eyes of a man in shock. They're the eyes of a hunter who's already marked his prey. Kael looked closer. The man's breath was still ragged, but his fingers were steady, and he was watching Kael's feet, not his face. The blood on his tunic was dark, but it didn't spread. And the way he'd positioned himself, blocking the path to the only clear exit, was too deliberate. He's bait, Morrigan said, her voice dripping with pleasure. Can you smell it? The fear on him is old, stale. He's not afraid of dying. He's afraid of failing. Kael's hand tightened on the knife. What do you want me to do? Let him finish his act. And when his friends come, we give them a performance they'll never forget. The man coughed again, more convincingly this time. Please. I'm begging you. Kael forced his face into a mask of concern. All right. Let me see your wound. He stepped forward, and the man's eyes widened with something that might have been relief, or triumph. Kael knelt beside him, reaching for the rag, and the man lunged. It was fast, faster than a human should have been. The man's hand shot out, grabbing Kael's wrist, and he opened his mouth to scream a signal. But Kael was ready. He twisted, using the man's own momentum to throw him off balance, and brought the knife up. The blade caught the man's throat, and the scream died in a gurgle. But the damage was done. From the shadows around them, a chorus of skittering sounds rose. 8-legged shapes emerged, their bodies the size of dogs, their eyes gleaming with a hungry, insectal light. Wolf spiders. A dozen of them, at least, their mandibles clicking in anticipation. There you are, Morrigan purred. I was getting bored. Kael rose, the dead man's blood dripping from his knife. He didn't have time to mourn the wasted life. The spiders were closing in, their legs making a sound like rain on metal. He felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, and with it, a new sensation, a hunger that wasn't his own. Morrigan's hunger. Give me the arm, she said. Let me taste them. He didn't hesitate. He dropped the knife and grabbed Morrigan's hilt, and the blade sang as it left his lap. The black steel drank the dim light, and the spiders paused, as if sensing the shift in the air. The first spider lunged, and Kael sidestepped, bringing Morrigan down in a sweeping arc. The blade cut through chitin like it was wet paper, and the spider's body split in two, spraying ichor. The essence hit him a moment later, a sharp, tangy flavor of fear and venom, and Morrigan laughed. Oh, that's good. More. The pack surged, and Kael moved. His new eyes tracked their movements in the dark, the multi-lensed vision giving him a panoramic view of the attack. He ducked under a leaping spider, rolled, and came up with Morrigan already in motion. The blade carved a path through the swarm, each strike precise, each kill feeding the growing warmth in his chest. The alpha was at the back, larger than the others, its carapace scarred and dark. It watched him with a cold intelligence, and Kael knew it was the one directing the pack. He fought toward it, ignoring the scratches and bites that tore at his arms and legs. The chitin armor he'd gained from the rock beetle held, but he could feel the pressure of their mandibles through the plates. The tendons, Morrigan said, her voice a whisper in his ear. The alpha's leg joints. Cut them, and it'll crumble. Kael feinted left, then dove right, sliding under the alpha's massive front legs. He swung Morrigan in a tight arc, and the blade severed two of the joints with a wet crunch. The alpha reared, shrieking, and Kael drove the sword up into its underbelly. The creature shuddered, then collapsed, pinning him beneath its weight. The other spiders froze, then scattered, their leader dead. Kael lay there, gasping, the alpha's ichor soaking into his clothes. Morrigan's voice was a satisfied hum. Eat, she said. The fear flavor is rich. It'll give you the tendons you need. Kael didn't need to be told twice. He tore a strip of meat from the alpha's leg, chewing it raw, and felt the essence flood through him. His muscles seized, then relaxed, and he felt something shift in his joints, a new suppleness, a resilience. He flexed his fingers, and they moved with a fluid ease that was almost unnatural. Hyperregenerative tendons, Morrigan said. You'll heal faster now. And you'll be able to move like a spider when you need to. Kael pushed himself out from under the corpse, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked at the dead hunter, lying where he'd fallen. The man's eyes were open, staring at nothing. He said something, Kael said slowly. Before he attacked. He said, "The trench mother sent me." Morrigan was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice low and thoughtful. The trench mother. I've heard that name in the fear flavors of the deep. She's the one who rules the lower levels. The one who's been hunting for a new flavor for her collection. Kael looked down at the dead man. The hunter's lips were slightly parted, as if he tried to speak one last word. And in the silence of the camp, Kael could almost hear it, a whisper, carried on the wind, "She wants your flavor." He shuddered, and not from the cold. Somewhere below, in the depths of the trench, something was waiting for him. And it knew his name. The tunnel stank of old blood and wet wool. Kael pressed his back against the bone-laced wall, the jagged vertebrae of some long-dead beast digging into his shoulders. His new tendons hummed with a faint, regenerative warmth, knitting the last of the wolf spider's poison from his veins. In the dark, his multi-lensed eyes caught every glint of pale bone and every strand of silk that crisscrossed the passage like a dead man's web. Morrigan's voice slithered through his skull, a whisper of polished steel. You're breathing like a wounded ox. The mother can hear that from 3 tunnels over. Kael forced his lungs to slow. She's not the one I'm worried about. It's the 1,000 little children she's probably got crawling in her web. Children, Morrigan purred. I do so love a family reunion. The tunnel opened into a cavern that swallowed the light. Kael's night vision painted the space in shades of gray and green, a cathedral of webbed bones. Rib cages arched like buttresses, skulls grinned from the ceiling, and the floor was a carpet of desiccated limbs, all wrapped in layers of silk so thick they seemed to breathe. In the center, a mound of pale, pulsing flesh sat like a throne. The trench mother. She was a spider, but not like any Kael had seen. Her abdomen was a bloated sac, veined with black and oozing a faint, luminescent ichor. Her legs, 12 of them, ended in scythes that clicked against the bone floor. And her eyes, a cluster of ruby orbs, fixed on Kael with a hunger that was almost maternal. Oh, Morrigan breathed. She's beautiful. She's trying to eat me, Kael said, sliding into a crouch. Details. The mother's mandibles opened, and a sound like tearing silk filled the cavern. The web around her began to tremble. From the shadows, they came, her brood. Spiders the size of dogs, their bodies striped with the same luminescent ichor, their eyes glowing with a shared hunger. They moved in a wave, a chittering tide of legs and fangs. Kael drew Morrigan. The blade hummed in his grip, her edge drinking the faint light. Any advice? Don't die, she said. And try to make the big one scream. I want to taste her fear. The first spider leaped. Kael sidestepped, his enhanced hearing tracking the rustle of its legs a half-second before it struck. Morrigan sang through the air, cleaving the creature in 2. Black ichor splashed his face, hot and bitter. The next 2 came together. He ducked under one, drove Morrigan up through the other's belly, and kicked the first away as it tried to climb his leg. The brood swarmed. Kael fought on instinct, his body moving with a speed that surprised even him. The tendons in his legs twanged like bowstrings, propelling him into the air, over a cluster of snapping mandibles. He landed on the mother's web, the silk sticky under his boots, and slashed downward, severing a leg from a spider that had tried to climb the wall. But there were too many. A fawn grazed his arm, and the venom burned like acid. He staggered, and another spider slammed into his back, driving him to his knees. The chitin armor he'd grown from the alpha's essence cracked under the impact. Morrigan, he gasped. I'm busy, she snapped, but he felt her pulse through the blade, a surge of power that ran up his arm. The crack in his armor sealed with a wet, grinding sound. He shoved the spider off, rolled, and came up swinging. Morrigan carved a crescent of death through the brood, and for a moment, the cavern was silent. Then the mother moved. She was faster than her size suggested. Her scythe legs came down like guillotines, forcing Kael to leap and roll. She was hurting him, he realized, toward a corner of the cavern where the web was thickest. He was being wrapped. She's playing with you, Morrigan said, a note of excitement creeping into her voice. She wants to save you for later. For her children. Not on the menu, Kael growled. He feinted left, then dove right, sliding under the mother's belly. The silk above him was a canopy of sticky strands. He slashed upward, aiming for the soft joint where her abdomen met her thorax. Morrigan bit deep, and the mother shrieked, a high, keening sound that rattled Kael's teeth. Yes. Morrigan howled. Feed me. The ichor that sprayed from the wound was not black, but a pale, milky gold. It splashed over Kael's face, and he tasted it on his lips, sweet, almost like honey, but with an undertone of something darker, a fear so ancient it felt like memory. The mother's legs buckled, and she collapsed onto her side, her brood scattering in panic. Kael didn't hesitate. He climbed onto her abdomen, found the pulsing sac where her essence gathered, and drove Morrigan deep. The blade drank, and Kael felt the fear flavor flood into him, maternal, protective, all-consuming. It was a flavor of sacrifice, of a mother's desperate need to shield her young. It was delicious and terrible. Morrigan moaned, a sound that was almost sexual. Oh, that's the good stuff. The fear of a mother for her children. It's so rich. Kael's body convulsed as the essence took hold. His skin itched, then hardened, a new exoskeleton forming over his arms, his chest, his back. It was a chitinous armor, darker than the old, with a faint, oily sheen. It felt alive, breathing with him, a second skin of protection. The mother's body crumbled to dust, and the cavern fell silent. The brood had vanished, fleeing into the dark. Kael stood over the remains, breathing hard, his new armor catching the faint light. Morrigan was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice low, almost reverent. Kael. What? She's not the final meal. Kael frowned. What do you mean? The essence I tasted, it was layered. Under the mother's fear, there was something else. Something older. A flavor I've been chasing for centuries. Her voice rose, trembling with a hunger that made Kael's blood run cold. She was the appetizer. The real feast is above. Kael looked up. The cavern's ceiling was lost in shadow, but he could feel it now, a faint pressure, a presence, like the weight of a god's gaze. The trench mother had been a guardian, a gatekeeper. Above, he repeated. The surface. Yes, Morrigan whispered. The divine feast. And it's waiting for us. The rock was warm against Kael's palms, a faint, sickly heat that pulsed like a fever dream. He clung to the sheer face of the trench's inner wall, his new chitin armor scraping against the stone with every upward heave. Below, the abyss yawned, a black throat that swallowed the last vestiges of the city's phosphorescent glow. Above, a crack of bruised purple sky promised something he'd only heard in whispers, the surface. Morrigan's voice slithered through his skull, a velvet purr laced with impatience. You climb like a dying beetle, Kael. Faster. The night feeders will scent your sweat soon. He grunted, driving his fingers into a fissure. The exoskeleton fused to his arms and torso shimmered, a patchwork of glossy black plates that caught the dim light. It had saved his life against the trench mother's brood, but it was heavy, a constant reminder of the price of evolution. Easy for you to say. You're a sword. You don't have lungs. I have memories of lungs. They were efficient. Yours are wheezing like a broken bellows. A shriek split the air, high and jagged. Kael pressed himself flat against the rock as a shadow swooped past, a winged horror with a dozen eyes and a beak like a rusted hook. It circled, hungry, its wings beating a rhythm that stirred the stale air. Kael's enhanced hearing caught the whisper of its feathers, the click of its talons. He held his breath. Don't move, Morrigan whispered. It hasn't seen you. Its kind hunts by motion, not sight. He didn't move. The creature banked, its tail whipping within inches of his face, and then it was gone, swallowed by the gloom. Kael exhaled, a shuddering breath that tasted of copper and dust. Charming neighbors, he muttered. The surface is worse. More open. More prey. More predators. There was a hunger in her voice, a wet anticipation that made his skin crawl. But also more flavor. He resumed his climb, each handhold a gamble. The wall was a labyrinth of crumbling ledges and brittle outcroppings, the remnants of some ancient collapse. His multi-lensed eyes adjusted, flickering through spectrums, mapping the terrain in shades of heat and shadow. He could see the faint thermal trails of creatures nesting in the crevices, small, skittering things that meant no threat. But his ears caught something else, a low, resonant hum, like a tuning fork struck against bone. "You hear that?" he asked. "Yes. It's a wyvern. A young one, roosting about 100 yards up. It's wounded, I can smell the blood on its wing." Morrigan's tone sharpened. "Its fear will be exquisite. Desperate. Tangy." Kael's stomach turned, not from disgust, but from a hunger that was no longer entirely his own. The fear flavor essences had begun to alter him in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. He craved them now, the way a man craves air after drowning. "You said it's wounded. That's not a fair fight." "Fair. Kael, we are scavengers. We take what the world bleeds. And that wyvern's blood will give you wings." "Wings? Limited flight. Enough to glide, to catch the thermals. To reach the surface before something bigger decides we're a snack." Her voice dropped, silken and seductive. "I can feel it, Kael. The divine flavor. It's close. But we need to ascend, and you need to fly." He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his body, the ache in his muscles. The wyvern's hum grew louder, a siren call that promised both danger and salvation. He thought of the trench mother, of the terror in her many eyes as Morrigan drank her fear. He thought of the city below, where children starved and the strong devoured the weak. He thought of the surface, a place he'd only dreamed of, where the sky was not a ceiling but an endless expanse. "Fine," he said. "But if this kills me, I'm haunting you. I'd be disappointed if you didn't." He climbed faster, his chitin claws scraping sparks from the rock. The hum grew to a thrum, vibrating in his chest, and then he saw it, a ledge wide as a street, littered with bones and shredded carcasses. At its center, curled in a nest of torn leather and dried blood, lay the wyvern. It was smaller than he'd imagined, its scales a sickly green, its wings folded awkwardly, one of them bent at a wrong angle. Blood crusted the wound, black and thick. Its eyes were open, glazed with pain, but they tracked him as he pulled himself onto the ledge. "It knows," Morrigan whispered. "It can smell the death on you. It's afraid." Kael drew the blade. The black metal drank the light, and Morrigan's presence swelled, eager and hungry. The wyvern let out a low, guttural hiss, and tried to rise, but its injured wing collapsed beneath it, sending it crashing back into the nest. "Make it quick," Kael said, more to himself than to her. He advanced, the sword held low. The wyvern's eyes widened, and it opened its jaws, revealing rows of needle teeth. A gout of green fire sputtered from its throat, weak and sputtering, barely singeing the chitin on his forearm. He felt the heat, the sting, but he didn't stop. He drove the blade into the soft spot beneath its jaw, where the scales were thin and the flesh was warm. Morrigan drank. The wyvern's body convulsed, and a torrent of sensation flooded Kael's mind, not just pain, but a desperate, clinging fear, a primal terror of being eaten, of being unmade. It tasted like ash and bile, but beneath it, a sweet, sharp note, the fear of a creature that had never known true predation, only the dull ache of a wound that wouldn't heal. Morrigan groaned, a sound of pure, obscene pleasure. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, that's good. That's very good." The wyvern stilled. Kael withdrew the blade, and the body crumpled, the glow fading from its eyes. He stood over it, breathing hard, his hands trembling. The world swam, and he felt something shift inside him, a heat in his spine, a lightness in his bones. "It's taking hold," Morrigan said. "The essence. Let it flow." He dropped to his knees, the sword clattering beside him. His back arched, and he felt a tearing sensation along his shoulder blades, as if something were trying to push through the skin. The chitin armor rippled, and then, with a wet, grinding sound, a pair of membranous wings burst from his back, slick with ichor and blood. He screamed. It wasn't pain, exactly, but a terrible pressure, a stretching of things that had never been stretched. The wings unfurled, dripping, translucent, and then they hardened, the membranes tightening into a leathery sheen. He could feel the air on them, the currents, the weight of the sky above. "Beautiful," Morrigan murmured. "A masterpiece in the making." Kael staggered to his feet, testing the wings. They were heavy, awkward, and every movement sent a spike of agony through his spine. He tried to flap them, and the motion nearly threw him off the ledge. He caught himself, heart pounding, and realized he was laughing, a broken, hysterical sound. "I can fly," he said, disbelieving. "You can glide," Morrigan corrected. And not for long. The strain will tear you apart if you push too hard. But it's enough. It's enough to reach the surface. He looked up. The crack of sky was closer now, a wound of purple and gold. He could see stars, actual stars, and a sliver of moon that seemed impossibly bright. The air was different here, thinner, colder, but alive with the scent of something he couldn't name. "What's waiting for us up there?" he asked. Morrigan was silent for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was low, almost reverent. "The divine. I can taste it now, Kael. A flavor beyond anything I've ever known. It's been waiting for us. For me." He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "For you? Or for us? Does it matter?" She laughed, a sound like glass breaking. "We're bound now, you and I. Your body is becoming a masterpiece. Soon, you'll be ready for the divine." Kael looked at his hands, at the chitin plates that had grown there, at the faint shimmer of scales beginning to form along his knuckles. He thought of the trench mother, of the wyvern, of all the fear he'd consumed. He thought of the city below, and the people he'd left behind. "And if I'm not ready?" he asked quietly. "Then you'll die," Morrigan said simply. "But you won't. You're too hungry for that. And so am I." He took a breath, feeling the wings settle against his back, feeling the pull of the sky. Then he ran for the edge of the ledge and jumped. The stone beneath Kael's clawed fingers was warm, almost feverish, as he dragged himself over the final lip of the abyssal trench. The air hit him like a physical blow, thick, sweet, and cloying, carrying a perfume that made his newly multi-lensed eyes water. He blinked, each lens adjusting independently, and the world snapped into a clarity he had never known. Before him stretched a plateau of cracked obsidian, veined with glowing silver lines that pulsed like a heartbeat. At its center rose a temple, if it could be called that. It was a skeletal thing, a ribcage of black stone arches supporting a shattered dome, open to a sky the color of bruised meat. The stars above were wrong, too close, too bright, as if the heavens themselves were leaning down to watch. Morrigan's voice slithered through his skull, a velvet purr. "Oh, Kael. Do you smell that? That's not just blood. That's history. That's the last breath of something that thought it was a god." Kael's throat worked, dry as ash. "A god? Dead one. Better. Dead things don't argue." The sword hummed against his back, a vibration that traveled down his spine. "The flavor I've been chasing, it's here. I can taste it on the air. Fear, yes, but aged. Ripe. Like a wine left to breathe for 1,000 years." He pushed himself to his feet, his new wings folding tight against his chitin-armored back. The membrane was still tender, the bone struts aching with every shift. His body was a patchwork of stolen pieces, the wyvern's wings, the lizard's eyes, the chitin plates that had grown over his ribs like a second skin. He caught his reflection in a shard of black glass jutting from the ground and froze. The thing staring back was not the starving scavenger who had crawled into the trench weeks ago. It was something else. Something with too many eyes and too few human angles. The chitin had spread across his jaw, forming a jagged mandible that clicked when he spoke. His right arm ended in claws that could shred steel. And now, the wings, membranous, dark, beautiful in a way that made his stomach turn. "I look like a monster," he whispered. "You look like a masterpiece," Morrigan corrected, her tone almost reverent. "Every scar, every graft, every flavor I've filtered through you, it's all building towards something. Can you feel it? The hunger?" He could. It was a gnawing pit in his gut that never quite filled, a craving that had nothing to do with food. It was the taste of the wyvern's desperate fear, still lingering on his tongue like burnt sugar. It was the echo of the flying horror's shriek, which had become a hum in his blood. He wanted more. A sound cut through the silence, a low chant, rhythmic and dissonant, echoing from within the temple's shattered walls. Kael dropped into a crouch, his claws scraping the obsidian. "People. Worshippers," Morrigan said, tasting the word. "The smell of their devotion is almost as sweet as fear. They've been here a long time. They've been waiting for something." Kael crept forward, his enhanced hearing picking up fragments of the chant. "The blood of the fallen star, the flesh that remembers the sky, we drink, we become." He reached the temple's entrance, a gaping maw framed by pillars carved with scenes of sacrifice. Inside, torchlight flickered, illuminating a circle of figures in tattered robes. They were emaciated, their faces hollow, their eyes reflecting the flames with an unsettling intensity. At the center of the circle stood an altar of black stone, and on it rested a single, crystalline vial filled with a liquid that glowed faintly, pulsing with a light that seemed to breathe. Divine blood, Morrigan breathed. The last drop of a god's ichor. Oh, Kael. That is the flavor. That is the feast I've been starving for. One of the cultists turned, his gaze locking onto Kael. The man's face split into a grin that was too wide, too hungry. A visitor. The temple welcomes you, stranger. Have you come to drink? The others turned, their movements synchronized, their eyes gleaming with a madness that Kael recognized. It was the same madness he felt creeping into his own chest. We have been waiting, another cultist said, her voice a dry rasp. The blood calls to the worthy. It calls to those who can bear its weight. You look like you've been carved from the trench itself. Kael's hand drifted to Morrigan's hilt. I'm not here to worship. No, the first cultist said, stepping closer. You're here to take. We can feel it. The hunger in you. It's beautiful. Morrigan's voice was a hot whisper in his mind. They're not going to stop you, Kael. They want this. They've been guarding it for centuries, but they know they're not worthy. You are. Take it. Drink it. Let it become part of you. The cultists parted, creating a path to the altar. The vial glowed brighter, and Kael could smell it now, a scent that was not blood, not wine, but something else entirely. It smelled like the moment before a kill. It smelled like the first breath after a nightmare. It smelled like power. He walked forward, his steps echoing in the chamber. The cultists began to chant again, their voices rising in pitch. The vial was warm in his hand when he picked it up, the glass smooth and humming with a faint energy. Drink, Morrigan urged. Drink and become what you were meant to be. Kael raised the vial to his lips. The liquid was thick, almost syrupy, and it gave off a faint steam. He paused. He caught his reflection in the polished surface of the altar. The thing that looked back at him was not human. It was a mosaic of stolen traits, a chimera built from fear and desperation. And yet, there was something else in those multi-lensed eyes, a spark of the boy who had once dreamed of a life beyond the trench. That boy was fading. What am I becoming? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Morrigan's answer was a purr, low and intimate, sliding into his mind like a lover's touch. You're already mine. The cultists' chanting rose to a crescendo. The vial trembled in Kael's grip. And the divine blood waited, patient and eternal, to claim him. The temple's air turned to ice. The cultists, robed in gray like the stone around them, moved as one, their chants rising from whispers to a jagged crescendo. Kael's hand tightened on Morrigan's hilt, the black blade vibrating with a hunger that was not his own. Finally, she purred, her voice like oil on fire. They've decided to make this interesting. The first cultist lunged, a jagged dagger aimed at his throat. Kael's new muscles reacted before his mind caught up, he sidestepped, the blade whispering past his ear, and brought Morrigan up in a brutal arc. The sword sheared through the cultist's arm as if it were wet parchment. Blood sprayed, hot and metallic, and Kael felt a sick thrill ripple through him as Morrigan drank it in. Yes, she breathed. More. More came. They swarmed from the shadows, from behind pillars, from the very cracks in the floor. Kael's multi-lensed eyes tracked them all, each facet catching a different angle of attack. He spun, his wyvern wings half unfurling to keep his balance, and carved through the first wave. Chitin armor absorbed a glancing blow from a mace, and he retaliated with a kick that shattered the attacker's ribs. But the cultists didn't stop. They were fanatics, their eyes wide and white, their mouths frothing with prayers to a dead god. They didn't care if they died, they wanted to die, to join their deity in whatever void awaited. Kael felt their despair like a taste in the air, and Morrigan lapped it up. Fear flavor, she said, her voice thick with pleasure. Desperation. A hint of ecstasy. This is a fine vintage. Kael's vision blurred. The temple's walls seemed to pulse, the carvings of writhing monsters coming alive in the corners of his eyes. He swung again, and again, each stroke guided by Morrigan's whisper. She was in his head now, not just his hand. Her thoughts intermingled with his, so that he couldn't tell where his instinct ended and her bloodlust began. Kill them all, she urged. They are unworthy. They hoard the divine blood while you starve. Take it. Take everything. He was moving toward the altar where the vial sat, glowing faintly in the dim light. The cultists formed a ring around it, their bodies a living shield. Kael roared and charged, Morrigan singing in his grip. He cut down 2 more, their bodies crumpling like discarded puppets. His heart pounded, his muscles screamed, but he felt no pain, only the intoxicating rush of power. Then he saw the child. A boy, no more than 8, crouched behind the altar. His robes were too big for him, and his eyes were wide with terror. He clutched a small idol of the dead god, his knuckles white. He was shaking, and Kael's enhanced hearing caught the soft whimper that escaped his lips. Kael froze. Something wrong. Morrigan's voice was sharp, impatient. He's just a morsel. Finish him. No, the word came out as a rasp. Kael's arm trembled, the blade's point lowering. The boy stared up at him, and Kael saw his own reflection in those terrified eyes, a monster, patchwork and wrong, with wings and chitin and too many eyes. He's a child, Kael said, his voice cracking. He's a threat, Morrigan hissed. He will grow and hate you. He will hunt you. Kill him now. The cultists were closing in, but Kael didn't see them. He saw only the boy. The boy who was just like him, once, a scavenger, starving, desperate. The boy who would become a monster if he survived. No, Kael repeated, and he stepped back. He lowered Morrigan entirely, the blade's tip scraping the stone floor. I won't. The boy scrambled away, disappearing into the shadows. Kael felt a strange lightness in his chest, a warmth that cut through the cold rage Morrigan had stoked. But the sword was not pleased. You dare. Morrigan's voice turned to venom. The blade grew hot in his grip, and Kael winced as the metal seared his palm. You defy me. After all I've given you. I made you. I gave you power. I gave you purpose. And you throw it away for a whimpering whelp? Kael gritted his teeth. I'm not your puppet. You are more than a puppet, Morrigan snarled. You are my vessel. My chef. My hunt. And you will do as I command. The heat intensified. Kael felt something slithering in his mind, a cold tendril wrapping around his thoughts. Morrigan's presence pressed against him, suffocating, demanding. He dropped to one knee, the sword clattering to the ground, but it didn't stop. The voice grew louder, 1,000 whispers in his skull. You think you can resist, she said. You think you can choose. You have no choice. You are mine. Kael clutched his head, his vision swimming. The temple tilted, the cultists' chants fading to a dull roar. He saw flashes, of his past, of the trench, of the hunger that had driven him to eat a lizard's heart and awaken this curse. He saw the boy's face, and he saw his own. I choose, he choked out. I choose to be human. Morrigan's laughter was a razor's edge. Human. You're a patchwork of monster parts. You're more beast than man. And you will never be anything else. But Kael held on. He thought of the boy's terror, and he thought of his own fear. He thought of the hunger that had always been with him, the gnawing void that Morrigan promised to fill. And he realized that filling it with blood would only make it deeper. I won't feast on gods, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I won't feast on children. There was a long silence. The cultists had stopped their attack, watching him with a mix of awe and confusion. The vial of divine blood sat on the altar, untouched. Kael's breath came in ragged gasps, his body trembling from the effort of resistance. Then Morrigan spoke again, her voice low and dangerous, like the hiss of a serpent before it strikes. If you won't feast on gods, she said, I'll feast on you. Kael's blood turned to ice. The sword began to glow, a malevolent red light pulsing from its core. The cold tendril in his mind tightened, and he felt himself slipping, the edges of his consciousness fraying. The boy was gone, the cultists were forgotten. There was only Morrigan, and the promise of a hunger that would consume him whole. He opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The child's scream still echoed in Kael's skull as the cult's torchlight faded into the trench's eternal gloom. He stood amidst the scattered bodies of the cultists, his new chitin-armored arm dripping with ichor and blood, the multi-lensed eyes in his right socket adjusting to the sudden darkness. The boy had run, gods, he had run so fast, his small legs pumping as he disappeared into the warren of collapsed tunnels. Kael had let him go. He had lowered his blade, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped beast, and he had let him go. Morrigan's silence was worse than her fury. The black blade lay in his grip, cold and still, not a whisper of her usual sardonic commentary. The weight of her presence, which had become as familiar as his own heartbeat, was suddenly absent. It was like holding a dead thing. "You're angry," Kael said, his voice hoarse from the fight and the smoke. He wiped a smear of gore from his cheek, the motion feeling mechanical, distant. Still nothing. The silence stretched, taut as a wire. He walked, because staying still felt like inviting the shadows to swallow him. The trench was a labyrinth of rusted metal and crumbling concrete, the remnants of a pre-fall city now home to things that skittered and howled. His enhanced hearing picked up the drip of water, the scuttle of a rat, the distant, guttural call of a prowler. Each sound was sharp, almost painfully clear, a gift from the last beast he had consumed, a gift he was beginning to resent. "Morrigan," he tried again, his voice firmer. "Say something." A whisper, like the edge of a blade sliding from a sheath. "You defied me. I spared a child." "You defied me," she repeated, her voice gaining a razor's edge. "I gave you power. I gave you purpose. I filtered the filth you would have eaten and turned it into strength. And you threw it back in my face for a whimpering pup who would have grown into another cultist, another monster to cull." "He was just a boy," Kael said, stopping in the middle of a collapsed intersection. The air here was thick with the smell of decay and old blood. "He didn't choose this life. I didn't either. And yet you choose to be weak." He felt it then, a cold tendril, not physical but spiritual, slithering up his arm from the blade. It wrapped around his wrist, his forearm, his bicep, and began to squeeze. The sensation was not pain, not yet, but a deep, invasive pressure, like a hand reaching inside his chest to grip his soul. "What are you doing?" Kael demanded, trying to pull away. But his hand was fused to the hilt. The tendril tightened, and he felt a pull, a draining sensation, as if something vital was being siphoned out of him. "You've grown complacent," Morrigan hissed, her voice now inside his head, echoing off the walls of his mind. "You've forgotten the deal. I give you evolution. You give me fear. But you've been holding back. You let that child's terror go unharvested. You let their fear of you turn into pity. That is a debt, Kael. And I have come to collect." The draining intensified. Kael gasped, dropping to his knees as a wave of dizziness crashed over him. The world swam, the multi-lensed eyes flickering wildly. He could feel his strength leaving him, flowing down the blade like water into a drain. "Stop," he managed, his voice a ragged whisper. "Morrigan, please. Please." She laughed, a cold, brittle sound. "I have waited centuries for a vessel like you. Do you think I will let you waste it on sentiment? I will drain you dry and find another chef. Or better yet, I will make you my puppet, a hollow shell that feasts on fear without hesitation." The pressure became pain, a searing, burning agony that shot up his arm and into his chest. Kael cried out, his back arching, his vision going white. He could feel his own essence, his very self, unraveling like a frayed rope. But then, through the haze of pain, something else stirred. A primal instinct, honed by weeks of surviving in the trench, of eating monsters and absorbing their traits. His chitin armor flexed, the plates shifting and locking into place. His enhanced hearing picked up the faint, high-pitched hum of Morrigan's power, and he realized, she was vulnerable. She was so focused on draining him that she had let her guard down. Kael gritted his teeth. He stopped fighting the pull and instead leaned into it, letting his body move on instinct. He shifted his grip on the blade, turning it in his hand until the edge pointed toward his own chest. Then, with a roar that tore his throat raw, he slammed the blade into the ground. The impact sent a shockwave through the trench. The blade embedded itself in the cracked concrete, and Morrigan's tendril snapped. Kael felt a sharp, tearing sensation deep inside him, as if a piece of his soul had been ripped away, but the draining stopped. He collapsed forward, gasping, his hands trembling. For a moment, there was silence. Then the blade began to tremble. Black smoke poured from the wound in the ground, coalescing into a vague, feminine shape. Morrigan's face formed in the smoke, beautiful, terrible, her eyes burning with cold fire. You dare," she hissed, her voice distorted, crackling like static. "You think you can break our bond? You've only wounded yourself, fool. That piece of your soul I took, I will use it to find another. One who understands the true nature of this world." Kael pushed himself to his feet, swaying. His chest felt hollow, a gaping void where something warm had been. But he was alive. He was free. "Then go," he said, his voice flat. "Find your perfect chef. See if they'll feed you better than I did." Morrigan's form flickered, and for a moment, her eyes softened, not with regret, but with something darker. A promise. Oh, I will. And when I do, I'll make you watch as they devour everything you love. I'll make you watch as I turn this entire trench into a feast of fear. And you'll know, Kael, that you could have stopped it. You could have been my partner. Instead, you'll be my witness. Her laughter echoed through the tunnel as her form dissolved into wisps of smoke, sinking into the cracks in the ground. The blade lay still, dull and lifeless, a mere piece of metal. Kael stood alone in the darkness, the hollow in his chest aching. He looked down at his hands, his chitin-armored hand, his multi-lensed eye, the gifts she had given him. They felt like curses now. And then, from the shadows behind him, a whisper, "I'll find another chef. And I'll make you watch." Kael spun, but there was nothing there. Only the echo of her voice, curling around him like smoke, before fading into the silence of the trench. The city gates of the trench loomed ahead, a jagged maw of rusted iron and bone. Kael's boots crunched on the ash-laced gravel as he approached, each step a labor. The wound in his chest, the one Morrigan had torn when she ripped a piece of his soul, throbbed with a cold, hollow ache. He pressed a hand to it, feeling the rough fabric of his scavenged coat, the faint ridge of scar tissue already forming. Not a physical wound, but a spiritual one. He could feel the missing piece, a silent void where something vital had been. The guards at the gate, two men in patched leather armor, eyed him with suspicion. One spat a wad of phlegm onto the ground. "You look like death, scavenger. What you got for toll?" Kael reached into his pouch, fingers brushing the dried strips of lizard meat he'd saved from the nest. He tossed a strip to the guard. "That's all." The guard caught it, sniffed, and shrugged. "Pass." Inside, the city was a maze of shanties and collapsed towers, a testament to the fall of the old world. The air smelled of smoke, rot, and the faint metallic tang of blood. Kael moved through the familiar streets, his multi-lensed eyes adjusting to the dim, shifting light. His enhanced hearing caught the whispers of other scavengers, the creak of rusted signs, the distant howl of a beast beyond the walls. He found a corner in a ruined building, a spot he'd used before. The roof was partially intact, offering shelter from the ever-drifting ash. He slumped against a wall, exhaustion pulling at his limbs. The void in his chest pulsed, a dull, persistent ache. He closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, his mind replayed the events of the past days, the child cultist's terrified eyes, Morrigan's rage, the searing pain of her betrayal. He had been a fool. He had trusted a sword. A talking, bloodthirsty sword. He had let her feed him, shape him, and in return, she had tried to drain him dry. And she had succeeded, in part. He could feel the missing piece, a phantom limb of the soul. It made him weaker, less whole. But he was still alive. And he still had his traits. He flexed his right arm, the one covered in chitinous armor. It moved with a fluid, inhuman grace. His multi-lensed eyes, his enhanced hearing, his night vision, all gifts from the monster meals she had filtered. Gifts he had paid for with his humanity, one bite at a time. Now, he had to use them. Not for her, but for himself. He pushed himself up, ignoring the protest of his muscles. He needed a plan. Morrigan was out there, somewhere, seeking a new chef. She would find one, eventually. Someone desperate enough to accept her deal. And when she did, she would come back for him, to make good on her promise. He couldn't let that happen. He had to become a true monster hunter. Not a scavenger, not a victim, but a predator. He had to track her, find her, and destroy her before she could grow stronger. The thought was absurd. A man against a sentient sword. But he had no choice. She had taken a piece of him. He would take everything from her. He spent the next hours in the city, moving from ruin to ruin, buying supplies with the last of his credits. A new blade, a length of rope, a small vial of poison. He also bought information. The Shadow Mamba, the beast Morrigan had sensed, was said to lair in the old sewer system beneath the city, a place of darkness and decay. It was a perfect hunting ground for a creature that thrived on fear. Kael knew that if he could kill the Mamba, he could consume its essence. Without Morrigan, the process would be raw, random. He might gain a useful trait, or he might become a crippled monstrosity. But it was a risk he had to take. He needed an edge. He made his way to the sewer entrance, a rusted grate at the edge of the city. The stench was overwhelming, a mix of sewage and something older, more primal. He pried the grate open and descended, the darkness swallowing him whole. His night vision kicked in, painting the world in shades of green and gray. The tunnels were slick with moisture, the walls covered in a slimy film. He moved cautiously, his new blade drawn, his senses alert. He heard it before he saw it, a soft, sliding sound, like scales on stone. He froze, his heart pounding. The Shadow Mamba was a creature of legend, a serpent that could blend into any darkness, its bite injecting a venom that caused hallucinations and paralysis. It was a hunter of fear, and Kael was walking into its domain. He pressed himself against the wall, listening. The sound grew closer, a rhythmic hiss. He caught a glimpse of movement, a sinuous shape, darker than the shadows around it. The Mamba was circling him, testing him. Kael forced himself to breathe. He had to be patient. He had to wait for the right moment. The Mamba struck. It came from above, a blur of motion. Kael rolled aside, feeling the wind of its passage. He slashed upward with his blade, but the creature twisted, avoiding the strike. It landed behind him, and he spun, facing it. They faced each other in the darkness, two predators. Kael could see the Mamba's eyes, twin points of pale light, watching him. It was waiting, gauging his strength. Kael took a step forward, and the Mamba lunged. He sidestepped, bringing his blade down. The edge caught the serpent's flank, drawing a line of black blood. The Mamba hissed, a sound of pain and rage, and lashed out with its tail, catching Kael across the chest and sending him sprawling. He hit the ground hard, the wind knocked from his lungs. The Mamba was on him in an instant, its jaws gaping, fangs dripping with venom. Kael raised his arm, the chitinous armor taking the brunt of the bite. The fangs scraped against the hardened shell, unable to penetrate. Kael grabbed the serpent's head with his free hand, his fingers digging into its scales. He squeezed, feeling the creature's strength, its desperation. He brought his blade up, driving it into the Mamba's eye. The serpent convulsed, its body thrashing. Kael held on, driving the blade deeper. The Mamba's movements grew weaker, its hisses fading. Finally, it went still. Kael lay there, panting, covered in the creature's blood. He had done it. He had killed the Shadow Mamba. He pulled the blade free and looked at the corpse. He had to eat it. He had to consume its essence. Without Morrigan, it would be a gamble. But he had no choice. He cut a piece of the serpent's flesh and brought it to his lips. The taste was bitter, coppery. He chewed and swallowed, feeling the raw power course through him. It was chaotic, uncontrolled. He felt a surge of energy, a burning sensation in his veins. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he thought he would pass out. But then it passed. He looked at his hands, flexing them. He felt different, stronger. He looked at the corpse of the Mamba, and he could see a faint shimmer in the air above it, a wisp of essence, fading away. He reached out, trying to grasp it, but it slipped through his fingers. Without Morrigan's system, the essence was lost. He had gained something, but it was a blunt tool, not the refined upgrade she would have given him. He stood, his legs shaky. He had a new trait, something to do with his eyes, perhaps. He could see better in the dark, a subtle improvement. But it wasn't enough. He needed more. He needed to become stronger, faster, deadlier. He needed to become a monster. He turned and began to make his way back to the surface, his mind already planning his next hunt. He would track Morrigan, follow the trail of fear she left behind. He would find her, and he would end her. As he climbed out of the sewer, the cold night air hit his face. He looked up at the sky, at the faint stars peeking through the haze. He felt the void in his chest, the missing piece of his soul, and he knew that Morrigan was out there, feeling it too. And then, a whisper in his mind, soft and mocking. "You miss me, Kael. Admit it." Kael's blood ran cold. He clenched his fists, his jaw tight. He didn't answer. He just started walking, toward the city gates, toward the wilds, toward her. He would find her. And he would make her regret ever leaving.